Ma'am, this gala is for invited guests only. The woman behind the registration table spoke just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Vanessa Brooks looked down at the elegant ivory invitation in her hand before calmly offering it across the table. "That's why I'm here," she replied with a polite smile. The woman barely glanced at the embossed card before sliding it back across the velvet-covered counter. "I'm sorry, but this invitation couldn't possibly belong to you." A few conversations nearby slowed. Champagne glasses paused halfway to waiting lips. Vanessa remained perfectly composed. "Would you mind checking the guest list one more time?" The woman folded her arms. "I already have." "Then perhaps there's another explanation." "There is," the woman answered coldly. "Someone must have given you an invitation by mistake." Vanessa studied the woman's name badge. "Olivia Harper, Director of Guest Relations." "I see," Vanessa said softly. "Thank you." She stepped aside without another word. Several guests watched with curious expressions. One older gentleman frowned, as if something about the exchange didn't sit right with him, but he continued toward the ballroom. Vanessa quietly looked toward the grand entrance where hundreds of guests were arriving beneath crystal chandeliers. 20 minutes earlier, a black luxury sedan rolled beneath the covered entrance of the historic Hamilton Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. Uniformed valets hurried toward the vehicle as the evening sun reflected against the building's marble columns. Vanessa stepped out wearing a simple navy evening gown that was elegant without demanding attention. Around her neck rested a delicate silver necklace, beautiful but understated. She carried no designer handbag with oversized logos, no entourage, and no visible signs of wealth beyond quiet confidence. "Good evening, Ms. Brooks," the valet greeted warmly. "Would you like me to keep the car nearby?" Vanessa smiled. "No, thank you. I'll probably be here a while." Inside the hotel lobby, hundreds of guests moved between floral arrangements, photographers, and volunteers preparing for the annual Hope for Tomorrow Charity Gala, one of Chicago's most prestigious fundraising events supporting youth education programs across the city. Television cameras captured local business leaders, philanthropists, and public officials arriving one after another. Vanessa paused near a display showcasing photographs of children who had received scholarships over the past decade. She quietly studied each smiling face before continuing toward the ballroom. As she walked, an elderly couple standing near the registration area appeared increasingly confused. The husband searched every pocket of his tuxedo while his wife anxiously looked through her evening purse. "I know I put the invitation somewhere," the gentleman muttered. Vanessa slowed her pace. "May I help you?" The couple looked slightly embarrassed. "We can't find our invitation," the woman admitted. "We've looked everywhere." Vanessa smiled reassuringly. "May I see your names?" After hearing them, she walked with the couple to a nearby volunteer. "Could you please verify Mr. and Mrs. William Parker on the guest list?" she asked kindly. The volunteer typed for only a few seconds before smiling. "You're absolutely here. Welcome." Relief spread across the couple's faces. "Thank you," Mrs. Parker said gratefully. "You saved us from quite a bit of embarrassment." Vanessa laughed softly. "We've all needed a little help at one time or another." The Parkers disappeared into the ballroom, still thanking her over their shoulders. The young volunteer watched Vanessa for a moment with quiet admiration before returning to work. Vanessa then approached the main registration desk, unaware that within the next few minutes, the same kindness she had shown complete strangers would not be returned to her. Vanessa waited patiently as guests continued arriving through the ballroom entrance. She had learned long ago that patience often revealed more about people than confrontation ever could. Across the registration area, Olivia welcomed one elegantly dressed guest after another with warm smiles and effortless charm. "Good evening, Senator." "Welcome, Mr. Harrison. It's wonderful to see you again." The difference in her tone was impossible to miss. When her eyes drifted back toward Vanessa, the smile disappeared almost instantly. "Ma'am," Olivia called across the lobby. "If you're waiting for someone, I'd appreciate it if you stepped away from the registration tables. You're slowing the line." Several guests turned to look. Vanessa walked over without the slightest sign of irritation. "I wasn't aware I was blocking anyone." Olivia forced a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "Our VIP guests are arriving now. I'd like to keep the entrance clear." Vanessa glanced behind her. There was nearly 10 feet of open space between herself and the nearest guest. She simply nodded. Of course. She stepped aside exactly as requested. A young event coordinator named Ethan, wearing a volunteer badge, had watched the exchange from only a few feet away. Something about it bothered him. He quietly checked the registration area before walking toward Olivia. Did her invitation have a problem? He asked. Olivia didn't even look up from her tablet. No, Ethan frowned. Then why isn't she inside? Olivia lowered her voice. Experience. Experience. I've organized charity galas for 12 years. Sometimes you just know when something doesn't feel right. Ethan looked toward Vanessa again. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't demanding answers. She simply stood near a display featuring scholarship recipients, reading each child's story with genuine interest. She doesn't seem like she's causing trouble, Ethan said carefully. Olivia sighed impatiently. You're new here. Trust your instincts. They usually save you a lot of headaches. Ethan nodded politely, but the explanation didn't satisfy him. A few minutes later, another guest hurried into the lobby looking visibly anxious. My wife is already inside, he explained. I forgot my invitation in the car. Olivia smiled immediately. That's perfectly all right, sir. May I have your name? Less than 10 seconds later, she handed him a guest badge without asking for identification. Ethan noticed the contrast. Vanessa had presented a physical invitation and was turned away. This guest had no invitation at all and entered without hesitation. The inconsistency lingered in his mind. Meanwhile, Vanessa wandered toward a silent auction display arranged along one side of the ballroom entrance. Children's paintings, handmade quilts, and community art projects filled the tables. She stopped in front of a watercolor painting of Chicago's skyline created by a 12-year-old scholarship student. A small handwritten note beneath the frame read, "One day, I want to become an architect so I can build homes where every family feels welcome." Vanessa smiled quietly. That's a beautiful dream, she whispered to herself. It already is, came a young voice beside her. Vanessa turned to find the student himself standing nearby with his mother. You painted this? She asked. The boy nodded proudly. Yes, ma'am. You have remarkable talent. The boy's mother smiled. Thank you. Winning this scholarship changed everything for our family. Vanessa congratulated the young artist before wishing them a wonderful evening. Neither of them recognized her. She preferred it that way. As the pair walked into the ballroom, Ethan approached Vanessa cautiously. Excuse me, ma'am. Vanessa turned with a friendly smile. Yes. Would you mind if I looked at your invitation? She handed it to him without hesitation. Ethan examined the embossed seal, the guest number, and the official signature. Everything appeared authentic. He looked back up, genuinely confused. This invitation looks completely legitimate. Vanessa smiled gently. That's because it is. Ethan looked toward Olivia, then back at Vanessa. For the first time that evening, he began to wonder if the biggest mistake at the Hope for Tomorrow charity gala hadn't happened inside the ballroom, but right here at the front door. Ethan looked down at the invitation one more time before handing it back to Vanessa. I'm sorry, he admitted. I don't understand. Vanessa carefully slipped the invitation into its envelope. Sometimes understanding takes a little longer than making assumptions. Ethan lowered his voice. Would you mind waiting here for a few minutes? I'd like to verify something. Vanessa smiled warmly. Take all the time you need. Ethan walked quickly back to the registration desk. Olivia, he said quietly, I checked the invitation myself. It's authentic. Olivia continued checking in arriving guests without looking up. I never said it wasn't. Ethan frowned. Then why won't you let her in? Olivia finally met his eyes. Because invitations can be borrowed. Do you have any evidence that's what happened? No, then why assume it? Olivia leaned closer. Because this gala has attracted gatecrashers before. My job is to protect our donors, not apologize afterward. Ethan glanced toward Vanessa, who was now standing near a display of scholarship photos, quietly reading each child's story. She doesn't look like someone trying to sneak in. Olivia's expression hardened. That's exactly why people get fooled. Before Ethan could reply, another luxury car stopped outside. A well-known real estate developer stepped out wearing a tuxedo. Olivia's face immediately brightened. Mr. Reynolds, welcome back. She greeted him with both hands and personally escorted him toward the ballroom, never asking to see his invitation. Ethan watched silently. When Olivia returned, he couldn't ignore the contradiction any longer. You didn't check his invitation. Olivia answered matter-of-factly. Everyone knows who he is. But nobody knows who she is, Ethan replied. Exactly. Across the lobby, two women sipping champagne quietly watched Vanessa. One whispered, "Do you think she came to the wrong event?" The other shrugged. "Maybe she works for the hotel." Neither intended to be cruel, but their assumptions landed no differently. Vanessa heard every word. She simply looked back at the scholarship display instead of responding. An elderly gentleman standing nearby noticed the exchange. He walked over carrying a walking cane and stopped beside Vanessa. "Beautiful evening," he said kindly. Vanessa smiled. "It is." The gentleman studied the scholarship wall for a moment. "My granddaughter received one of these scholarships 3 years ago. That's wonderful. It changed her life." He extended his hand. "I'm William Parker. We met a few minutes ago." Vanessa shook it warmly. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Parker." He glanced toward the registration desk. "Have they still not checked you in?" Vanessa answered calmly. "They're being cautious." William slowly turned toward Olivia. "That doesn't look like caution to me." Before Vanessa could stop him, William walked directly to the registration table. "Young lady," he said politely but firmly. "This woman helped my wife and me when no one else noticed we needed assistance. If she's invited, why is she still standing out here?" Olivia forced another professional smile. "Sir, we're simply following event procedures." William nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps your procedures need another look." Several guests nearby overheard the conversation. For the first time that evening, the quiet discomfort in the lobby began to spread. People who had previously ignored the situation started paying attention. Ethan noticed it immediately. The atmosphere had shifted. This was no longer about one guest waiting outside a ballroom. It had become a question everyone in the lobby was silently asking themselves. If kindness earned trust for everyone else tonight, why didn't it earn trust for Vanessa Brooks? The quiet murmur spreading through the lobby quickly reached guests waiting near the ballroom entrance. People weren't staring anymore. They were watching. Olivia sensed the shift immediately. She straightened the stack of guest badges on the registration table before addressing the growing crowd with a practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll have everyone checked in as quickly as possible." It was a polite attempt to move attention away from Vanessa. It didn't work. William Parker remained where he stood. "Young lady," he said calmly, "I've attended this gala for 11 years. I've never seen someone treated this way over a valid invitation." Olivia kept her voice measured. "Sir, every event has security procedures. Procedures should protect people," William replied, "not embarrass them." Several nearby guests quietly nodded. Ethan stepped beside Olivia and lowered his voice. "I think we should call Ms. Mitchell." Olivia looked at him sharply. "For this?" "She's the executive event director. She's busy with the opening ceremony. This situation is becoming her business." Olivia's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." Ethan didn't argue, but he also didn't move away. Across the lobby, Vanessa remained remarkably calm. She walked toward a nearby refreshment table, poured herself a glass of sparkling water, and thanked the server with the same warmth she had shown everyone else that evening. The young server watched her leave before whispering to another employee, "She doesn't seem angry." "Maybe she should be," the other replied quietly. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened briefly as music drifted into the lobby. Inside, guests applauded the arrival of several major donors. Outside, Vanessa remained standing alone. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone watching. Ethan finally made his decision. He quietly stepped away from the registration desk and pulled out his radio. "Control, this is Ethan at the main entrance. Go ahead. Could you ask Miss Claire Mitchell to come to the registration area when she's available? We have a guest verification issue I'd like her to review personally." Olivia heard every word. "I told you not to escalate this." Ethan answered respectfully. "I'm not escalating it." He glanced toward Vanessa. "I'm asking for certainty." Before Olivia could respond, another black sedan rolled beneath the hotel's entrance canopy. A middle-aged couple stepped out, laughing as they approached the registration table. Olivia welcomed them warmly and checked them in without delay. Neither was asked for identification. Ethan watched again. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. William noticed it too. "Interesting," he murmured. "Some people receive trust immediately. Others have to earn it." Olivia pretended not to hear him. A few moments later, a woman in a tailored gray suit emerged from the ballroom carrying a tablet. "Claire Mitchell, Executive Event Director." She walked briskly toward the registration desk after seeing Ethan wave discreetly. "What's going on?" she asked. Ethan answered first. "This guest presented a valid invitation, but she hasn't been admitted." Claire turned toward Olivia. "Why?" Olivia replied confidently. "I have concerns that the invitation may not belong to her." Claire extended her hand toward Vanessa with a professional smile. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Claire Mitchell. May I take a look at your invitation?" Vanessa handed it over without hesitation. Claire examined the embossed seal, scanned the QR code with her tablet, then paused. The screen loaded for only a second before her expression changed ever so slightly. She looked from the tablet to Vanessa, then back to the screen once more. She didn't say a word. Ethan noticed the change immediately. So did Olivia. Claire looked up again, her eyes now carrying a mixture of surprise and disbelief. "Ms. Brooks?" she asked quietly. Vanessa smiled politely. "Good evening, Ms. Mitchell." Claire took a slow breath. For the first time that evening, she understood exactly who had been standing outside the ballroom all along. Claire looked at the tablet again, making sure she had not misread the screen. The encrypted QR code had verified instantly. Beneath the confirmation appeared a short note that only senior event administrators could see. Board chair, lifetime patron. Escort personally. Claire slowly lowered the tablet. "Ms. Brooks," she said respectfully, "may I apologize for asking you to wait?" Vanessa smiled gently. "You were doing your job." Claire turned toward Olivia. "Could we speak for a moment?" They stepped only a few feet away. Ethan remained at the registration desk, unable to hear every word but easily recognizing the seriousness on Claire's face. "Do you know who that guest is?" Claire asked quietly. Olivia shook her head. "No, but," Claire interrupted. "Then why did you decide she didn't belong?" Olivia hesitated. Something didn't feel right. Based on what? Olivia searched for an answer that sounded reasonable. She arrived alone. She wasn't recognized by any of our regular donors. Her dress was simpler than most of the guests. Claire stared at her in disbelief. "Those aren't security concerns. Those are assumptions." Olivia's confidence began slipping away. "I was only trying to protect the event," Claire answered firmly but calmly. An event dedicated to inclusion should never begin by excluding someone without evidence. William Parker, still standing nearby, quietly nodded to himself. It was the first sentence that truly matched the purpose of the evening. Claire walked back toward Vanessa. "Ms. Brooks, the host is finishing his opening remarks. If you'll allow me, I'd be honored to escort you inside personally." Vanessa looked toward the ballroom doors, but didn't move. "Before we go in," she said softly, "may I ask one question?" "Of course." Vanessa glanced toward Ethan, then toward the volunteers greeting guests with nervous smiles. "If my invitation had belonged to someone else standing here tonight, someone without my name, would they have been treated differently?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. After several long seconds, she admitted the truth. "I honestly don't know." Vanessa nodded. "That's the question I hope everyone asks themselves after tonight." Claire lowered her eyes. She understood that the evening was no longer about correcting one mistake. It was about confronting the culture that had allowed the mistake to happen in the first place. Just then, applause erupted from inside the ballroom as the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of the evening's special guest and founding patron. Claire looked toward the stage entrance, then back at Vanessa with a faint smile. "They're introducing you." Olivia frowned. "Introducing her?" Claire turned toward Olivia, her voice barely above a whisper. "The woman you stopped at the front door isn't just another donor." She paused for a single breath. "She's the person this entire gala exists to honor." The applause inside the ballroom continued as Claire stood frozen for a brief moment. Olivia's face slowly lost its color. "What did you just say?" she whispered. Claire looked at her steadily. "This evening's founding patron is Vanessa Brooks." Olivia instinctively turned toward the woman she had kept waiting for nearly 20 minutes. Vanessa showed no anger, no satisfaction. She simply stood with the same quiet dignity she had carried since arriving. Before anyone spoke again, the master of ceremonies' voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's scholarship presentation, we'd like to recognize the woman whose vision transformed hope for tomorrow from a neighborhood fundraiser into one of the nation's largest education foundations. Please join me in welcoming our founding chair, Ms. Vanessa Brooks." The ballroom erupted into applause once more. Guests nearest the entrance looked around, expecting Vanessa to appear from inside. Instead, one by one, their eyes shifted toward the lobby. Confused whispers spread rapidly. She's still out here. Why hasn't she gone in? Isn't that? Claire took one respectful step toward Vanessa. Ms. Brooks, everyone is waiting for you. Vanessa smiled gently. They've already waited this long. Another minute won't matter. She turned toward Ethan instead. Thank you. Ethan looked surprised. For what? For asking questions before making conclusions. Ethan lowered his eyes, humbled by the compliment. I almost didn't. But you did, Vanessa replied. That's what matters. Claire then faced Olivia. Please remove yourself from guest registration. Olivia didn't argue. She quietly unclipped her event badge and placed it on the registration table. Her hands trembled. I never meant for this to happen, she admitted softly. Vanessa looked at her with calm compassion. I believe you. Olivia raised her eyes, confused. Vanessa continued. Most unfairness doesn't begin with hatred. It begins with certainty that we already know someone's story before they've spoken. The words landed heavier than any public reprimand. Olivia looked down, unable to answer. Claire gently extended her hand toward the ballroom entrance. Ms. Brooks, would you allow me to escort you in? This time Vanessa nodded. As they began walking, something unexpected happened. The guests nearest the entrance quietly stepped aside on their own. Nobody was asked to move. Nobody was instructed. They simply created a clear path. William Parker removed his glasses and smiled proudly. Now, he whispered to his wife. That looks like the welcome she should have received from the beginning. Ethan watched Vanessa disappear through the ballroom doors before looking back at the empty registration desk. Less than 30 minutes earlier, he had believed his job was simply checking names against a list. Now he understood it was something much greater. It was protecting every guest's dignity before protecting the event's reputation. Inside the ballroom, nearly 500 guests rose to their feet as Vanessa entered. The applause grew louder than before, but Vanessa's attention wasn't on the stage. As she walked through the center aisle, she paused beside a table where scholarship recipients and their families were seated. She bent slightly to shake hands with each child before continuing forward. Only then did the audience realize why so many young students smiled the moment they saw her. To them, she wasn't the evening's honored guest. She was simply the woman who had quietly changed their lives long before anyone else learned her name. Vanessa accepted the standing ovation with the same quiet grace she had shown in the hotel lobby. She smiled warmly at the audience before taking her seat at the head table instead of walking directly to the podium. The applause slowly faded, but the atmosphere inside the ballroom had changed completely. Guests who had witnessed the scene at the entrance looked at one another differently now. They weren't talking about the foundation's fundraising goals anymore. They were thinking about what had happened before the gala had even begun. The master of ceremonies stepped back to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, before Ms. Brooks delivers tonight's keynote address, we'd like to share a short video celebrating 20 years of hope for tomorrow. The lights dimmed. Large screens around the ballroom filled with photographs of children receiving scholarships, graduating from college, opening small businesses, and returning years later to mentor the next generation. Near the end of the presentation, a simple sentence appeared across the screen. Opportunity begins when someone chooses to see your potential instead of your appearance. The room fell silent. Vanessa slowly stood and approached the podium. She looked across the audience for several seconds before speaking. Thank you for being here tonight. Her voice was calm and warm. Most people believe this gala is about raising money. She smiled gently. It isn't. Curious expressions spread across the ballroom. Money builds programs, she continued. But people build futures. She paused briefly. This evening, before I entered this ballroom, I was reminded how easy it is to judge someone before learning their story. Several guests quietly lowered their eyes. Olivia, now standing discreetly near the back of the room without her event badge, felt every word. Vanessa never looked toward her. She didn't need to. I'm not sharing that experience to embarrass anyone, Vanessa continued. I'm sharing it because every organization, including my own, is only one assumption away from forgetting the values it claims to represent. The room remained completely silent. The true measure of leadership, she said, is not how we welcome important people. It's how we treat people before we know they're important. Applause began softly before growing into another standing ovation. Vanessa raised one hand, inviting everyone to sit again. Tonight, she said, I'd like to ask something unusual of all of you. She glanced toward Claire Mitchell. Beginning tomorrow morning, every volunteer, every manager, every board member, including myself, will complete new hospitality and unconscious bias training before next year's gala planning begins. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Vanessa smiled. Not because one person failed. She paused. Because systems should never depend on one person's good intentions. Claire nodded immediately. We'll begin first thing tomorrow. Several board members applauded their agreement. Vanessa then turned toward the scholarship recipients seated near the front. Everything this foundation has accomplished exists because people believed every child deserved the same opportunity. She smiled at the children. Let's make sure every family receives the same welcome. The audience rose once again. This time, the applause lasted even longer than before. Near the back of the ballroom, Olivia quietly wiped away a tear. She finally understood that the greatest consequence she would carry home that evening wasn't losing her position at the registration desk. It was realizing that one assumption had almost prevented the very person who created hope for tomorrow from walking through its doors. The gala ended nearly 2 hours later, but no one rushed toward the exits. Small groups of guests remained scattered throughout the ballroom, continuing conversations that had little to do with fundraising totals and everything to do with the evening's unexpected lesson. Near the stage, scholarship recipients lined up to thank Vanessa personally. She greeted each family with the same warmth, asking students about their dreams instead of their grades, remembering names from years earlier, and listening far longer than anyone expected from the evening's honored guest. Across the room, Claire quietly approached Olivia, who was helping volunteers clear registration materials. You don't have to stay, Claire said gently. Olivia shook her head. I do. She carefully folded tablecloths before continuing. Running away would only make me feel better. It wouldn't make me better. Claire nodded. Tomorrow's training wasn't only for the staff. Olivia looked up. You're attending too? Claire smiled. I'm leading it, and I'm sitting in the front row. Both women shared a small laugh, breaking the tension that had followed them all evening. A few minutes later, Ethan walked over carrying a forgotten invitation envelope. Ms. Brooks, he called softly. Vanessa turned. I believe this is yours. She accepted the envelope with a smile. Thank you, Ethan. He hesitated before speaking again. May I ask you something? Of course. When Ms. Mitchell recognized your name, you could have ended everything in a second. Vanessa nodded. Probably. Why didn't you? She looked around the ballroom for a moment before answering. Because I wasn't trying to prove who I was. Her eyes drifted toward the volunteers packing away decorations. I was trying to understand who we were. Ethan remained silent. Vanessa continued. Titles can solve one problem. Character solves the next 100. Ethan smiled quietly. I don't think I'll ever forget tonight. I hope not, Vanessa replied warmly. Neither will I. Before leaving, Vanessa walked back to the registration table one last time. Olivia looked up immediately. Ms. Brooks, she began, her voice filled with regret. Vanessa gently interrupted. May I ask you a favor? Olivia looked surprised. Anything. Vanessa pointed toward the now empty entrance where the first guests had arrived earlier that evening. Next year, when the very first guest walks through those doors, Olivia listened carefully. Welcome them exactly the same way you'd welcome the last person you expect to see. Olivia nodded slowly, emotion filling her eyes. I promise. Vanessa extended her hand. After a brief hesitation, Olivia shook it. There was no dramatic forgiveness. No applause. Just two people acknowledging that tomorrow could begin differently than today. As Vanessa stepped outside the hotel, the cool Chicago night greeted her with a gentle breeze. The city lights reflected across the river while guests slowly departed behind her. Her driver opened the car door, but before getting in, Vanessa looked back once at the grand entrance. Earlier that evening, it had been a doorway where someone had been judged before being known. Tonight, she hoped it had become something else. A reminder that the true purpose of charity is not measured by the generosity inside the ballroom, but by the dignity shown at the front door. She smiled softly and climbed into the car. As the sedan disappeared into the quiet Chicago streets, the lights of the Hamilton Grand Hotel remained glowing behind her, welcoming tomorrow's guests with the promise of becoming a little more worthy of the mission they claimed to serve. The following Monday morning, the lobby of the Hamilton Grand Hotel looked almost exactly the same. Fresh flowers stood beside the entrance. Volunteers arranged welcome packets behind the registration tables. Soft piano music drifted through the marble hall. But one important detail had changed. Every volunteer, every coordinator, every manager, and every board member gathered before the doors opened for a new training session led jointly by Claire Mitchell and Vanessa Brooks. There were no cameras, no reporters, no donors, only the people responsible for welcoming strangers. Claire began with a simple question. What is the first responsibility of hospitality? Several hands went up. Efficiency, professionalism, security. Claire smiled politely before shaking her head. Vanessa stepped forward and answered quietly. Dignity. The room fell silent. She looked around at every face before continuing. Everything else comes after that. Olivia sat in the front row exactly as she had promised. She wasn't there as director of guest relations anymore. She had voluntarily accepted a different role while completing additional training. Not because anyone demanded it, but because she believed trust had to be rebuilt through actions instead of titles. Vanessa never mentioned what had happened at the gala. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew. Instead, she shared photographs of scholarship recipients, volunteers, elderly donors, first-time guests, hotel staff, and families from every background. Every person in these photographs arrived carrying a story, she said. The only question is whether someone took the time to discover it. Ethan quietly wrote those words at the top of his notebook. Months later, they would still remain there. Near the end of the session, Claire uncovered a framed photograph that had been hanging beneath a cloth. It showed the entrance of the gala on the night of the event. Guests filled the lobby, smiling as they arrived. Mounted beneath the photograph was a brass plaque engraved with one sentence. The mission begins at the front door. No names appeared beneath it. Vanessa preferred it that way. As the room applauded softly, William Parker unexpectedly walked in carrying his cane. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said with a grin. Claire laughed. Not at all. William looked toward the volunteers. I've attended this gala for 12 years. He paused before smiling warmly. Last year, I thought generosity was measured by how much money people gave. He glanced toward Vanessa. Now I know it's measured by how people make strangers feel before anyone knows their name. No one spoke for several seconds. There was nothing left to add. That evening's lesson had become part of the foundation itself. As the training concluded, volunteers took their places behind the registration tables for another community event. The very first guest through the doors was an elderly woman wearing a simple coat and carrying an invitation that had become slightly wrinkled in her purse. Before she could say a word, Olivia stepped forward with a genuine smile. Good morning, she said warmly. We're so glad you're here. The woman smiled back with visible relief. Across the lobby, Vanessa watched quietly for a brief moment before turning toward the exit. She knew real change was never proven by one speech, one apology, or one unforgettable evening. It was proven by the next ordinary person who walked through the door and was welcomed with the dignity they deserved from the very beginning. And as Vanessa stepped into the Chicago morning, she realized that the greatest legacy any leader could leave behind was not a building, a foundation, or a fortune. It was creating a place where no child, no family, and no stranger would ever again have to wonder whether they belonged.